All right, welcome everybody. My name is John Brender, and I'm going to take you through a little foreign language learning odyssey for the next, say, 35 to 40 minutes. I've updated this quite a bit. Anybody who's seen this in the past was probably a little bit more random, but I tried to think this through in terms of giving you tips that have to do with various things. So we have a section on cognitive development, a section on reading, and mostly general tips. So we're going to start with general advice. Okay, everybody see the fun little pun there on general advice? Haha. All right. The first thing that I want to mention is when you're learning a language is learn to say, what is this or this thing? You can use it in many instances, especially when you point. Anyone who's learned Chinese knows jaga, jaga, jaga. You point to what you want to eat in the cafeteria, and it gets you through the first day pretty easily, okay? If it's Spanish, it's que es esto, and German, was ist das, etc. Okay, so learn to say, what is this? You can ask people, and it will readily increase your vocabulary, okay? Next, your first two phrases in any language should be the equivalent of where is the bathroom, okay? Où sont les toilettes, okay? Oterai wa doko desu ka in Japanese, okay? Los servicios donde están in Spanish, so on and so forth. And the second most important thing that you need to learn is I'm hungry, okay? So whatever language it is, or where is the refrigerator? Those are my first two phrases in Japanese so that I knew I could survive those first couple of days, right? Next, when studying vocabulary, don't just look at the word. Say it, hear it, write it, and listen to it. The more senses you involve in your learning, the more likely you are to retain what you learn. So if you're learning the word for cake, okay, in some language, pastel, cakey, whatever it is, eat some cake while you're doing it, okay? Cement it into your brain. Use all the senses that you can. Next, keep a pocket-sized notebook with you at all times, or a cell phone if you live in the 21st century, and write down the words whenever you can. I still have the very little notebook that I used to keep with me in Spain. I would write down all kinds of little things. You'd be out with your friends. You'd say, how many words can you come up with for bathroom? How many words do you have for this? You hear an expression, you write it down, okay? And whenever you are at the supermarket or standing in line or at the doctor's office, you can bring out your book, okay? So that's number 5. So study your notebook whenever you have a few free minutes, waiting for a ride, waiting for a class, waiting in a doctor's office, or waiting in line are but a few places. All right. Now, studying for short periods of time is often better than spending long periods. The important thing is studying frequently. Try studying 5 minutes of your target language in between studying other subjects, okay? So like conditioning for a sport, you need to build up your endurance for conversing in a language. I will tell you from having taught languages, from having studied languages for many years, you're not going to be able to cram, okay? So a little bit at a time, look at it frequently. That's how you get the vocabulary and the phrases that you know that you need in the beginning, okay? Next, try to think in the target language. As you find yourself or imagine yourself in various situations, ask, how would I say whatever it is? Okay, I think I learned a lot of Spanish just cutting the lawn, thinking, if I were at the post office and I needed to order this, blah, blah, blah. Of course, I'm dating myself. Who goes to post offices anymore, right? If I go to a restaurant, how would I ask, say, writing? Maybe I better look it up, okay? Repeat it to yourself. So on and so forth. Also, try writing a journal. By trying to express something, you will naturally run into difficulties and thereby challenge yourself. If you can't look up your answers, try your teacher or a native speaker. But most importantly, underline or note your questions, okay? So this is a great way to expand your ability in a language by realizing exactly the things that you need to say, to ask, to know, to understand, okay? Next, passively expose yourself to radio, TV, movies, and music in the target language. If you're, for example, in China, just have the radio on, have the television on, and you'll just hear things. You will pick up some words, but more importantly, you'll pick up the rhythm, you'll pick up intonation, all sorts of different things, okay? And as Gloria Stefan once said, the rhythm is going to get you, okay? Next, understand that language is much more than just words. Use and rely on pointing, hand gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice. This concept is known as pragmatics. I could give you a lot of bizarre examples, but you can really make yourself known when you use your gestures, okay? If the doctor or the nurse says, have you vomited today? And you said, what? And then they do a hand gesture like this, you can usually figure it out, okay? When listening, try to grasp as much meaning as you can. Don't freak out if you don't understand something. Oftentimes, the speaker will repeat him or herself for emphasis, especially in Spanish. The great thing about learning Spanish is people never told you a story once. They told it to you 3 times, okay? And by the 3rd time, by gosh, you are going to get it, all right? Doesn't happen in all languages, but in Spanish, you can expect it. And I thought it was because I was a foreigner, and then I realized that they told those stories 3 times to each other. A Puerto Rican friend of mine who was teaching cross-cultural education explained that when you tell somebody something, if you just say it once, they don't believe you. So for example, if I say, this is a great cup of coffee, you don't think anything of it. But if I say, I tell you, this is really the best cup of coffee I've ever had. No, seriously, honestly, you've got to try this coffee. By the 3rd time, you might be willing to take my advice, okay? So 3 times is the magic number in Spanish. Practice using important formulas. For example, in Spanish, tengo que plus infinitive, right? Tengo que lavar la ropa. I need to wash the clothes. Tengo que ducharme. I have to whatever. Tengo que cortar el césped. I have to cut the grass. Think of all the things that you have to do. Chinese, 你可以, right? You may blank and then add verbs and just say that so many times that it just becomes embedded so that you're always able to use these kinds of things together. Chinese, another 我喜欢 is I want, and then whatever it is that you want, okay? Add those things, say it again and again, and you will never forget these words, okay? Another thing, some people are a little ambitious when they begin to learn a language. They want to say the most difficult things imaginable. So when trying to express yourself, do it simply. For example, if you really want to say, it would behoove you to partake in a more serious engagement of your academic pursuits, settle for estudia más, or study more, okay? So find the simplest way to say something. I find that language majors are really good at Pictionary because we know how to boil down our thoughts into something really simple to make ourselves understood. And on the left is a cartoon that I drew back in when I was a freshman in college. I won't tell you how many decades ago that was. But this is somebody that I traveled with who basically said, I was contemplating as to whether it might be possible to indulge in purchasing a portion of nutrient within a more center proximity as opposed to the outer lying region. And the Italian pizza vendor said, you wanted the centerpiece of the pizza? He said, right. Okay, so make it easy on yourself. Next, you may have seen this in the color purple. Label as many of your belongings as possible in the target language. I remember in Spanish, when I was a Spanish student assistant, teaching assistant, I labeled my stapler, la grapadora. And every time I used the stapler and I punched the stapler, I saw la grapadora. And to this day, I have not forgotten la grapadora, okay? There's comes a point where you can label too many things and then you just don't notice anything, but labeling helps. Next, try coming up with mnemonic devices whenever possible. For example, in Chinese, in order to say I'm hungry, the second most important thing you can say in any language, the word for hungry is okay? What is is E for empty. I'm on empty. So when I associate being hungry, I associate being empty. So in Chinese, it's simply 我饿了, right? I'm on empty, I'm hungry. Okay, so find some kind of weird mnemonic. Others, associate it with a person that you know, okay? So for example, in Chinese, the word Ben, anybody know somebody named Benjamin? Ben means stupid in Chinese, okay? So associate that with someone named Ben, Bun, okay? Ta and Bun, right? He's stupid, okay? Or Han, somebody that you know who is goofy, okay? So I put these friends of mine, my good friend Ben Moyers and Haley Han. So I think, Haley, goofy, okay, so on and so forth. All right. Next, a couple of other mnemonics in case you were studying Japanese. An easy way to remember how to get married is kekkon shimasu. Remember, everybody has kekkon their wedding day, okay? So you can find all these kinds of weird mnemonics. Whatever works for you is fine. You don't have to share it with anybody. It can be weird, it can be whatever, okay? By the way, a good friend of mine, Larry from Calvin College, wrote these two books. One's called Speak and Read Japanese, the other Speak and Read Chinese, where he provides a number of mnemonic devices for Larry Herzberg. I'm sorry, the name left me for a second, okay? Look for patterns so that you can learn multiple words with little effort. For example, in Chinese, there's the word hao, which means good, and they use it for just about everything. So when you have hao plus kan, which is good look, is good looking. Okay, that person's good looking. Hao chi, good eating. So it's something that is delicious. Hao he, good drinking. Okay, we don't really have that word, delicious, for drinking. Hao ting, good sounding, and so on. So you see this one word hao and a number of other words that you can combine to make different things. So always look for patterns. If you're going to learn a word, learn 10 words. English patterns, just examples. If you see bi, right, we know that it means two. So if you were learning English, and you can do this with a lot of Latin languages, you have bicycle, bifurcate, biweekly, biannual, so on. And the logy is the study of, right? So you get all these things like astrology, physiology, theology, Spanish, astrología, fisiología, teología. You've just learned 30 words, okay? Repeat things to yourself, especially when you are alone, washing dishes, cleaning house, driving, etc. Okay, like I said, cutting the lawn, I learned a lot of Spanish. Okay, just saying things to myself, repeating things to myself. Memorize dramatic lines or perform skits. So if you were learning English, you could find things like, here's looking at you, kid. I could have been a cantando, right? Or you had me at hello. Show me the money, okay? So on and so forth. Spanish, I remember memorizing La vida es sueño y los sueños, sueños son. Life is but a dream, and dreams are also dreams, okay? Very commonly known in Spanish. This is at the risk of being slightly sexist. What I enjoyed very much about learning Spanish were the piropos, okay? What are piropos? Piropos are compliments, just over-the-top compliments, generally men to women, and they would be things like, con esos ojos mirándome, ya no me hace falta la luz del sol. With those eyes looking at me, I no longer lack the light of the sun, okay? All these types of very over-the-top compliments, okay? Another one, cualquier día de estos, me como su sonrisa y dejo el mundo sin luz. One of these days, I'm going to eat your smile and leave the world without lights, okay? Again, over the top, but funny. And when I would use those in Spanish, like, does this crazy foreigner know these silly phrases and so on? Here's some social considerations when learning a language, okay? When you learn a new expression, run out and use it as much as you can. In Japanese, when I learned how to say, how old are you? When is your birthday? I asked everybody around me, when is your birthday? To the point where I never forgot how to ask, when is your birthday? Okay, so run out and use your expression, find out more information from more and more people, and you will cement it in your brain. If you have a chance to practice with a native speaker, do it. And children are great, okay? You can have all kinds of crazy discussions with children. Take advantage of that. Find a conversation partner who would like to learn your language, or better yet, one who has no interest in learning your language at all. So the more opportunity you have to practice with someone else, the better, okay? Now, it can be kind of, when you have these language exchanges, be careful, because sometimes you can be a language hog, right? And you have to be sort of considerate and make sure that you go back and forth. But if you meet somebody who doesn't even care about learning your language, so much the better. Study out loud with a partner by asking serious, fun, and even ridiculous questions that incorporate the vocabulary and structures you are studying. If a native speaker is present, he or she may help where difficulties arise. So when I was working with the Confucius Institute, we had daily China Corner, and people would come and talk about whatever it was that they were studying at the time. Okay, so just initiate fun, bizarre, interesting conversations, get to use the vocabulary, become familiar with it, so on. Just don't be shy, okay? Next, use your target language with your friends as a secret code language. Ask if they think a price is too high, if they think someone is attractive, etc. Okay, so this is a little bit like the code talking. I will say that my wife and I, as we were raising our son, we would use Japanese when it came to determining a punishment. So we would say, oh, how long should we ground him? 1 week, 2 weeks. So to this day, if he hears Japanese, he freaks out because he thinks he's in trouble, okay? But it's a nice little secret code that you can always use with somebody else. Try not to seem rude, but it allows for privacy. And when in Rome or Madrid, get excited about whatever they're excited about. So if you really want to make friends with a Spaniard, ask to try their chorizo, whatever they make in a particular village. Tell them it's the best chorizo you've ever had in your entire life, and you will be friends for life, okay? So get excited about whatever, whether it's wine, whether it's the particular cheese, the manchego, the architecture, the old cathedrals, the literature, soccer, politics. Get to know about these things. Ask people about what they think about this, that, and the other. They're great conversational starters, and people appreciate you when you take an interest in their culture. Be curious, be hyper curious. Has everybody seen the Norwegian cruise line president who gets on and says, be curious, okay? Be curious. Curiosity is very important. You can't just sit and be passive and learn a language. You need to ask questions, be curious. Here's some cognitive stuff. I like this picture, huh? Okay. Chunks of meaning. Don't just learn a single word. Try to learn chunks of meaning, right? So for example, in the garden, okay? On Saturday at 3 o'clock, so on and so forth. The big dog, not just the dog. So you start to think in terms of getting phrases together. So chunks. Next, realize that we are all predisposed or wired to learn a language, and that the more you learn, the more accelerated your learning will come. At some point, your brain just takes you for a ride, okay? You've been working at it, and something just clicks almost without you realizing. So realize that as you get past a certain hump, you suddenly find yourself getting better, and you almost wonder, how did I know this? Where do I know this from, right? So the more you learn, the more you can tack on to what you've learned, okay? The human brain is amazing. We are all wired, predisposed toward learning languages, and you can learn a second language, okay? Or a third. Don't get into the bad habit of relying on translation. There won't be time for that in conversation. Somebody says, ¿Cómo estás? What is it? Oh, ¿Cómo, how estás? Oh, that's second person, present, singular. How are you? How are you? They're going to walk away by the time you've translated that, right? So get ready to just speak back in the target language. Don't rely and say, how do I say this? How do I say this? Get used to saying as much as you can in the language. Train your brain, okay? Whether it's the phonetics, the phonology, the sound, the morphology, meaning the stuff that you tack on the beginning or the middle or the end of a word, the syntax, the way these things work, all the peculiarities. You need to train your brain, okay? Just practice this, sort of like any kind of exercise. Train your brain. So some examples, the vowels and rhythms in Spanish. I would tap on my table and I would say, vamos a la playa las dos, right? Because Spanish is a staccato rhythm. And we don't want to speak Spanish the way we speak English, say, vamos a la playa las dos, okay? It's going to sound really weird. So you have to get used to whatever it is that they do in that particular language. And so in Spanish, it's rhythmic, it's staccato, as opposed to a stress language like English, where I went to the beach the other day, right? We have a sort of a stress here and there, but Spanish, it's always going to be vamos a la playa. Yo fui a la playa el otro día, right? Da, 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 okay? in Chinese, for example, you need to train your brain to put the adverbial phrase in the beginning. Adverbial phrase, wow, what does that mean? It means the time or the place. But Chinese has no tenses per se, so we need to say, now I go shopping. Tomorrow I go shopping. Yesterday I go shopping. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. I go shopping. So all of those adverbial phrases need to come to the beginning of the sentence, unlike in English where we can put it wherever we want. So in Chinese, train your brain. Get that adverbial phrase out of the way, and then continue on with your sentence, okay? So this is an example of training your brain in Chinese. In Spanish, train your brain to be passive, okay? To not accept fault. So I love this about Spanish. You do not lose your keys in Spanish. You do not say, perdí las llaves. You say, se me perdieron las llaves, which means the keys were lost on me. Maybe I was there, but they were lost on me. You don't forget anything in Spanish. You say, se me fue, it left me, okay? You don't break plates. Se me rompió el plato. The plate got broken. There I was, okay? Se me olvidó tu dirección. I forgot your address. No, you say your address was forgotten on me, okay? So train your brain to say it this way and not directly from your translation. Find these aspects of language and commit to them. Here's an interesting quick story. When I was in Spain, I learned very quickly that the way you write an essay in Spanish is not the way you write an essay in English. So I wrote what I thought was a fantastic essay on Una Monos Niebla, and I thought I had a great thesis. I backed it up with all of these great supporting paragraphs, and I finished it off by reiterating the thesis and a conclusion. I'm like, this is great. I got it back a week later and it was a C, and I was devastated. I brought it to my roommate who was fluent in Spanish and English. He grew up in California. His mother was Spanish. His father was Mexican. And he looked at my essay and he goes, you know what? When I read this, it makes perfect sense in English, but when I read it in Spanish, I'm expecting more. I want you to say, that is to say that. In other words, so on and so forth. And I did that for the next essay and I got an A. I thought it was satirical. I couldn't believe that I was explaining all this stuff way beyond what I felt was necessary, but that was exactly what I needed to do in Spanish. So when we look at these somewhat outdated ideas, English is fairly linear, right? It's a straight line. Romance languages tends to kind of start out, it makes a diversion, it comes back, it makes another diversion, it eventually comes back to where you started, and voila. East Asian languages, Japanese or Chinese, the information is all there, but it does not follow the standards that we're used to unless it's journalism, in which case, for example, the Chinese borrow from American standards, okay? So be aware that the way people present thoughts are not exactly the way you are expecting them in English, whether in writing or in speaking. It may be helpful to study an additional language. So just the way you can put a weighted donut on a bat and swing it for a while, then take the weighted donut off, it feels so much easier. I can tell you after trying to speak Chinese for a week or two and going to Spanish, it's like, what a relief, okay? But I swear that my Spanish has become better from having studied other languages because something in my brain that I can't quite explain is just makes language learning and understanding a little bit easier. So if you learn another language, it will make the first one that you study easier, and you will understand certain things of language that will help you. Train your brain to use the subjunctive. So if you have problems with the subjunctive, this is a mnemonic that I came up with when I was in graduate school, where we look at indicative township and the River K and subjunctive city. So how do I use and when do I use a subjunctive? This might not make any sense if you're not studying Spanish or French or Romance language, but trust me, there's some really cool stuff here, right? And I'd be glad to explain this for hours if anybody's really as geeky as I am about this. All right. Reading advice. Okay. Reading is fundamental. Reading will skyrocket your language ability. Once you get to reading, you will get better, which is why Chinese and Japanese are a lot more difficult, because you really need to learn a lot and memorize a lot of characters before you get to a point where you're able to read. Languages that are phonetic, you can probably jump in a little bit quicker. So beware of those things. First of all, when reading, don't agonize over every word or expression. Let yourself continue reading as though it were your native language. Then go back and read the passage again if necessary. The important thing is not to get discouraged. Even if you don't understand everything, you are exposing yourself to vocabulary, syntax, style, thought processes, rhythm, etc. So read it and then read it again, okay? Don't get discouraged. It will come to you, okay? Read comics, okay? As a beginner, consider reading comic books in the target language. You will be guided by pictures and learn colloquial language, expressions, wordplay, and the humor and prevailing issues of the culture. I learned a lot of stuff from Mafalda, who is a character in an Argentine comic, right? The main character in an Argentine comic. And the great thing about Japanese, if you are learning to read a comic book, they have something called furigana, okay? So there's hiragana, which is one way of writing Japanese, native Japanese language. There's katakana, which is the way they use to write foreign words. And then there's kanji, which is a way to write the Chinese characters. Furigana is used if you don't know the kanji, which is like Chinese, they give you the pronunciation. So you'll notice the little red arrows are pointing to the furigana that tell you how to pronounce these words if you don't know them. And they use this for native speakers as well as in learners, okay? Learners can benefit from this. So if you wonder what that particular character is, you can see on the side the pronunciation, okay? Consider a graded or easy reader. So I used to teach a very common novel from the 14th or 15th century called Lothario de Tormes in Spanish. And you can find a graded reader that uses not the original old Spanish or middle-level Spanish, I'm sorry, mid-age Spanish, but modern Spanish, and they limit to about 1,000 words, okay? So it's much easier to read Lothario de Tormes when you have a graded or easy reader, okay? Now, I recommend something like this, a native book, as opposed to, for example, Alice in Wonderland in Spanish, because the translation is going to be much more like what you would expect in English, okay? It's not a bad thing to do, but if you get the original text or a graded reader of the original text, you learn more about the culture. When reading, it is better to read something twice quickly than once slowly. Mentioned that. And when you're reading a novel or short story, don't get discouraged in the beginning, because that's when authors tend to use their most flowery language. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? So don't worry about that first page, because I guarantee any writer spends 10 days on the first page, and once they get to page 30 or 50, they zip through, okay? And their language is a little bit easier. And plus you get to know the characters and what the author's trying to get at. And so the story becomes easier as you go along. So don't get discouraged right off the bat. Okay, remember reading subconsciously teaches and reinforces the following. When you read, you are reinforcing your vocabulary, expressions, rhythm, cultural values and concern, and how thoughts are organized. All those things come about when you read in another language. And finally, be kind to yourself, okay? A lot of people think that they should learn a language in 8 days. I'm sorry, it doesn't happen. I don't care what Berlit says. I don't care what Duolingo or anybody else tries to tell you. They're like fad diets. You're just as likely to lose 20 pounds in a week as you are to learn a language in a week, okay? So first of all, don't worry if you don't understand some of the things people are talking about. Sometimes Americans and Brits don't even understand each other. If these three British gentlemen were talking about British Parliament or about cricket or rugby that's going on in Britain, I would be lost, just as they would probably be lost where these New York Giants football fans are discussing the latest NFL game, right? So we don't all understand everybody immediately. So give yourself a break. You may speak fluent Spanish, but if somebody's talking about children's television shows in Argentina from the 1990s, you may have no frame of reference any more than they will know Captain Kangaroo in your language, okay? Try steering topics toward mutual interest. So for example, a lot of Americans don't realize that they're isolating international students when they talk about something distinctly American, like Saturday Night Live, American football, right? The Jonas Brothers, heaven forbid, Billie Eilish. They may know these things, but if you can try to find something that they can talk about, chances are they will stick around a little bit longer. And likewise, when you go to another country, you may have no idea what they're talking about. You might try, but if you steer the language toward, or the conversation towards something else, chances are you'll want to stick around a little bit more, okay? Go on a quest, okay? So everything when you are in a foreign country and you don't know the language is a quest. Just going to the bus station and buying tickets in China is a quest, I guarantee you, right? Buying a train ticket in Colombia, okay? I'm sure is a quest on its own, right? Navigate your way across town, visit a touristy site, take a taxi ride. All of us know what it's like to try to explain to the taxi driver how to get somewhere in a language that we're not particularly fluent in, right? A lot of my students who went to China would just get on the subway and just go somewhere and get off at random places and just try to figure out what they're seeing, what's going on, talk with the people, so on. Feel good about your accomplishments, right? Like Zach and Slater, pat yourself on the back, right? If you have successfully navigated your way through a subway, checked into a hotel, negotiated a price using the target language, pat yourself on the back. Feel good about yourself. Okay, and allow yourself some breaks, okay? I go crazy watching too many TED Talks where people say, get out of your comfort zone. The magic happens over here. I'm sorry, but you need sometimes to get back into your comfort zone, just kind of collect your thoughts, complain about your host country with your other expat friends, and then go on, okay? Allow yourself a break. And remember that learning a language is not accomplished by taking a pill. It takes years of hard work and determination to become highly fluent. Furthermore, you can never expect to know a language completely. So there will always be room, lots of room for improvement. In other words, don't feel ashamed or intimidated. Others must walk the same walk and literally talk the same talk, okay? So don't get discouraged, say, oh my gosh, so-and-so is speaking far better than I am. I feel so bad. Everybody has different strengths and you learn at different paces. And I've seen people who were C students in their first year of a language and they became the best students after 2 or 3 years, okay? And remember that even small children in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, and Spain can speak Spanish, and that you are smarter than small children, okay? And finally, most importantly, is it more important or more importantly? I don't know. Teach or tutor, okay? By teaching and tutoring, you prepare yourself, you prepare something, you present, you appraise, you provide, you think things through. In Spanish, they say enseñar es aprender 2 veces, but I say 4 veces. Teaching is learning 4 times, okay? And something Nelson Mandela said that I thought was great. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart, okay? Your native friends will appreciate the effort and feel a much closer connection to you if you speak to them in their language. And finally, have fun. This is the most important of the 3 most important things, okay? I am happy to open this up to questions if there are any questions online or here in the room. Stop share. There we go. So any questions, thoughts, disagreements? I'll entertain all of those.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So how do, because as for many Chinese learner, as a foreign language learner, so 5 Chinese characters very difficult to understand because it looks like a picture to them. It's not make sense if you don't learn the radicals or the phonetics or the meaning of each part. Is any way can help the students learn the Chinese characters? Or is any useful way for you?
Explain that it's not all one system. It's something that developed over 5,000 years. And it will make certain things will make sense up to a point. Okay. There's certain radicals that make perfect sense there's some words that make perfect sense, right? Like huali li shu, my favorite, right? Striped nut rat is used for chipmunk, okay? Makes perfect sense. Sometimes there are things that don't make sense, okay? But focus on certain things, certain radicals that make sense and things that are like them and group them together. So rather than learn one word at a time, try to learn multiple words that might look alike. And there's also words in Chinese that where we use symbols because they sound alike, right? So let people be aware. Some of these are make a lot of sense. Some of these are for sound. Some of these have really interesting backgrounds and so on. But the more you learn in Chinese, the more you'll realize that there are, for example, 7 kinds of logic. Okay. And each of those can take you down a different level, but there's no, let them understand there's no one form of logic for learning all of the words. And the more you learn, the more you will be able to piggyback on what you have learned. But let them know that it's going to be a slow climb during that first year. Okay. But the more you get, the more you can build up on. So let them know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. They just have to get to the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. 谢谢.
Yeah, 别客气. Are there other questions? Have you come to any roadblocks and said, oh my gosh, I can't learn this language. What can I do?
John, have you had any experience with the use of a frequency dictionary?
Oh, in Chinese?
In Chinese, where it would make the most sense to display the words, since it's difficult to put them in an alphabetical order, put them in the order of their frequency of use. And the entire dictionary is defined that way. So you have words that are in common speech every day are the first entries in the dictionary.
Well, let's turn the question over to our Chinese teachers here. Are there any frequency dictionaries or anything that you would recommend?
The dictionary?
Yeah.
Chinese.
For example, looking up words that are more frequently used as opposed to looking up by stroke order.
Oh, actually, I last time Dr. Brender just recommended these books. I read it and I find it's very useful, especially the this one, Speak and Read Chinese.
Yeah, these are the ones written by Larry Herzberg from Calvin College. He's really
Yeah, it's really good. So it's like a pocket dictionary. It's not that you can find every words, Chinese words in this book, but you can find the most frequent words. Like if you want to find out what's the meaning of a canteen, like cafeteria, you can just look it up and it will explain this to you in an English way, in English thinking way. So the way you can more accept it. So I find this book is really good. And yeah.
There's a set of books by a young Chinese mother who has her children in this country, and she wanted to teach them Chinese, so she wrote a series of books called Chinesey. It's mainly describes the characters in a way that explains why that picture means what it does. Why each pictograph means what it does.
Yeah, there's a certain point at which the Chinese makes perfect sense. And then there's another point at which it stops making sense. That you just sort of have to learn or figure out where the logic is going. But yeah. Great. Other questions? I see some chats. I don't know if any of you wrote a question here. No, any
Hey John, how many languages do you speak and which is your favorite?
I don't know if I think in any of the languages, including English. But I feel most comfortable in Spanish. I was a Spanish major and I did a master's in Romance linguistics. I lived in Japan for 2.5 years, so I'm fine having conversations, although I have to admit that if I watch a Kurosawa movie, I'm going to have a little bit of a struggle trying to understand what the samurai are saying. And I mean, I don't know, I can have a house guest in German or in French and maybe in Chinese as well. I can ask my way around. My attitude with Chinese is if somebody hasn't learned English well enough, they're stuck listening to my really bad Chinese. So it's kind of their punishment, the way I see it.
Gotcha.
other thoughts or questions, or if you come, something came up in the chat. All of the notes sound like great advice, and I'm assuming that these are active areas of research. Are there any books, papers you suggest that talk about the effectiveness of various techniques? Not offhand, but thank you for the question, Jacob. Now that we have scholar.google.com, right, which I discovered the day that I handed in my dissertation, unfortunately not before, there are an awful lot of things that you can look up about language learning and language acquisition. So if you look up, reading, language acquisition, and so on, you're going to find just tons and tons of stuff out there. Okay. So you can look at first language acquisition, which is learning as a baby, and then second language acquisition. I think Chomsky's wife, Carol Chomsky, was a big name back in the 80s. I don't know who the big people are now because it's no longer my principal area of research.
There was one researcher who claims that adult learners need a language parent, in part to speak with them. And it's not just listening to the words as they're spoken, but to see how their mouth moves when they recite the words in that new language. That's a critical part of forming the correct words yourself, is to be able to see how that's done.
Right. And there's a lot of literature about trying to learn a second language the way you would learn a first language. So definitely mimicking the way people speak. If you turn on a station without sound, you can tell if they're speaking Spanish or English, right? Because if they're speaking English, their mouth are like this. But if it's Spanish, you see, like, ay, de mí, like everything is really stretched out. So if their mouth is constantly like that, it's probably Spanish. Watch Telemundo without the sound and just look at the way people, right? Because they don't open their mouth at all with British English, right? So, and I mean, the more you can observe and the more you're tuned into some of these things, the better your language will become. Notice the way, when and how Japanese people bow, or their body language. All of these things are really important. When I speak Spanish, for some reason, my hands go up in the air where they never do in English, right? So when you finish a story in Spanish, your hand goes up, you say, just, right? It just happens, okay? So really, if you're effective in a language, you will your personality will change as you go from one language to the next. I'm not the same person when I speak Japanese. If I'm speaking formally, I just get really uptight. And if I'm speaking informally, it's far more rude than I would ever dare to be in English.
Well, there's research that suggests that if you know 2 languages, you will probably not suffer senile dementia. If you know 3 languages fluently, you're immune to any kind of mental deterioration as you age.
I'm betting on that. I'm betting heavily on that one. So as my knees and other parts of me become decrepit, so far I don't feel the mental relapse. I mean, I'm no better than I was, a while back, but I'm definitely no worse. So yeah, I think it's a great mental, form of gymnastics in some ways, because you're forced to think in different ways and see things actually in different ways. So just a very quick example, in Japanese, if I have to think whether I'm older than you are or younger than you are, and that will dictate the way that I speak to you. But if I speak to you in English, I'm not looking for that at all. Right?
You just lost everybody.
I lost everybody. Wow. Oh, I see. It's not on the screen. Okay. I didn't see anybody go away, but yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I'm happy to No, if not, then thank you very much for attending. Much appreciated. We will edit this and put it online, so you can find it on, if you look up Learn a Chinese Phrase at Wayne State University, you will find the YouTube page, and we should have that up probably by the end of the week. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. I hope this was helpful. If you would like a copy of this, I could send you a PDF. My email is AP as an advanced placement, coincidence, 4501@wayne.edu. AP 4501@wayne.edu. So Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for the presentation.